Welcome to our presentation on breaking barriers in second language learning, where we talk about improving social and educational support for international students and immigrants. Why is second language learning important? According to Stats Canada, nearly 465,000 people permanently immigrated to Canada in 2024. This stat doesn't include international students and foreign temporary workers. A majority of these immigrants come from India, followed by China and the Philippines. This is relevant as English and/or French is not the first language of a majority of Canada's newcomers and is essential for living in Canada. International enrollment continues to increase significantly in the Canadian education system. From 2022 to 2023, over 33,000 international students were enrolled in K-12 Canadian public schools and 468,000 post-secondary international students in Canadian universities and colleges. According to Darwin and Norden, learners invest in language because they recognize how it would help them acquire a wider range of symbolic and material resources, which would allow them to increase the value of their cultural capital and social power. In this presentation, we will be asking, what are the current Canadian language policies for newcomers? Who is most affected by language-based inequities? How do social factors influence second language acquisition? And what can educators and policymakers do to help? In this slide, let's explore legislation and policies in second language learning in Canada. To start off with legislation, the Official Languages Act was passed by the Canadian government in 1969, and its purpose is to ensure respect for English and French as the official languages of Canada. This piece of legislation makes English and French the official languages of Canada and promotes bilingualism in Canada's education systems. The Indigenous Language Act is also federal legislation that was passed in 2019. According to the Assembly of First Nations, this legislation aims to enable the exercise of Indigenous language rights by creating legal assurance for adequate, sustainable, and long-term funding and support for Indigenous-led initiatives to reclaim, revitalize, maintain, and strengthen Indigenous languages. Now to look at policy. Canada's immigration policy has a strong focus on bilingualism and the official languages. Immigration policy is intertwined with the knowledge of English and French. According to the Government of Canada, one of the objectives of our immigration system is to respect the equality of French and English so that communities and individuals who speak either of those languages benefit from immigration. Language programs and language proficiency also plays a role in determining one's citizenship status in Canada. In addition, there are several education and immigration policies on the provincial and territorial levels that also have a strong focus on language learning. The provinces and territories play a key role in administering some language programs, which we will see in the next slide. New immigrants and international students have access to English and French learning opportunities via government-led programs. In this slide, let's compare two of these programs. LINK, which stands for Language Instruction for Newcomers to Canada, is an English language program for newcomers to Canada seeking to improve their listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills. According to the Government of Canada, these classes are often flexible and offer various locations and schedules. Some places also offer childcare, in addition to transportation and classes for people with special needs. For example, the Toronto District School Board, also known as TDSB, offers part-time and full-time classes, and some locations also offer evening classes. TDSB offers classes in different language levels, from beginner to high to intermediate. Most locations provide care for newcomer children aged 19 months to 6-year-old. All locations are accessible by local transportation, and in some cases, some learners can even qualify for public transportation assistance. ESL, also known as English as a Second Language, and FSL, French as a Second Language, programs provide language instruction for newcomer students whose first language is not English or French. This program is offered to newcomers to Canada, international students, and citizens wanting to improve language skills. Sometimes these programs are offered at no cost when delivered via school boards, but can also be provided at cost via private schools, universities, and colleges. Key differences between both programs include the eligibility for enrollment, costs, and the availability of resources. Link is more focused on integrating newcomers and preparing them for life in Canada and citizenship, while ESL focuses on enhancing language skills for academic and work purposes. There are several barriers in second language learning across Canada. To start off with the policy barriers, as seen in the previous slide, not everyone has access to free language learning programs such as LINK and ESL. This is a major gap in second language programs and immigrant settlement services as well. Another barrier is unequal access to learning minority official languages. For example, Quebec's French-only laws prioritize teaching French as a second language, making ESL classes less accessible. The unequal access highlights the challenges in ESL and FSL education teacher supply and demand in Canada as well. There's a shortage of FSL teachers in particular, as it is a minority official language in most provinces. This is also due to a lack of qualified teachers, poor working conditions, and low pay rates. Moving on to the social and cultural barriers. According to Ellis, the social context in which learners live and work influence how successful they are in learning a second language. The standard of living and financial situations of second language learners also play a huge role in language acquisition. Another barrier is discrimination and marginalization. According to Jarvin and Norton, a learner may be highly motivated but resist opportunities to speak if a given classroom is sexist, racist, or homophobic. It can also be argued that these language policies create a loss of heterogeneity and creates a pressure to conform into the Canadian identity. According to Sturzuk, there has been a shift from the linguistic and ethnic heterogeneity of previous generations to the homogeneity of the current generation, which is a result of settlers' deliberate decisions to give up old languages and old ways in order to become Canadian. It is also notable that there is a lack of policy that addresses the barriers to Indigenous learning. Indigenous language programs lack funding and resources to fulfill the mandate of the Indigenous Languages Act. According to Ball, Indigenous children have inequitable access to resources for health and development, which also leads to high rates of academic failure.
Well, as we have seen, language learning doesn't happen in isolation. It's shaped by where we live, how we're treated, and whether we're allowed to fully be ourselves. For me personally, these factors became very real when I first moved abroad as international student. Back in 2012, I arrived in the US with strong English test scores and confidence. However, in real conversations, I felt hesitant, invisible, and disconnected. I realized that knowing English wasn't the same as being heard. Just like Darwin and Norton helped me understand that language learning is also about investing in identity. And that investment doesn't always feel secure, especially when your voice doesn't fit in dominant norm. My story isn't unique. In fact, what I experienced has been widely studied in language education theory. Darwin and Norton describe language learning as deeply social and emotional. It's not just about mastering grammar, it's about how we see ourselves and how we are seen. But access to recognition and participation isn't equal. Language becomes a gatekeeper, deciding who gets to belong and who stays on the margins. Jenks and the other authors remind us that classroom practices often reproduce larger power structures. Identity, investment, and power are all embedded in the language learning process. Even though we have this understanding of identity, investment, and power, many real world policies and practices still fall short. ESL and LINC programs often prioritize job readiness over long term integration. Fleming argues that they rarely support learners' cultural identities. Garcia and Odigai also highlight the lack of plurilingual practices in real classrooms. Students are often expected to assimilate, to leave parts of themselves behind. But language learning shouldn't be about fitting in. It should be about building mutual understanding and spaces where people can belong. So, where do we go from here? If language learning is about identity and belonging, the change has to be happen across all level. Educators can adopt culturally responsive teaching and recognize students' full language repertoires, not just English or French. Students can support each other, speak up about their needs, and help create more inclusive learning spaces. And policymakers need to invest in programs that go beyond job training to support long term integration and community connection. Language equity is everyone's responsibility. Now, if we truly want inclusive language education, we need to look beyond just skills. Language learning is an act of identity negotiation. Every learner deserves to feel seen, supported, and valued. Plurilingual classrooms aren't just about language, they're about honoring lived experiences, different ways of knowing, and deeper human connection. Equity in education means shifting from fitting in to genuine belonging. And that shift begins with listening. Listening leads to empathy. And finally, empathy leads to action. And that action belongs to all of us, I believe. Thank you for listening. We hope our video presentation has encouraged reflection on how language is learned, lived, and supported. Let's continue building classrooms and communities where every voice truly matters. Thank you.